Awesome. All right. We're ready to get started here a little bit late. Call us into, what do we do? Order into session, whatever we want to call it. For Sherwood City Council work session, January 12th, 2026. We got one item on the agenda tonight, and we're going to talk about public safety funding and potential conversations around levies or fees. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Ty. Are you running this or I'm going to Craig? Okay,
So first, like you said, local option levy, we also have a fee discussion if we get to that tonight, but if not, we can move that to, we need to do the fee part on Saturday or another time. So really, David Bodway, our finance director, has been leading this project as well as some of the chief's input into this project, as well as Public Works input into the project for the fee side. And then we also brought David Williams with Piper Sandler in to review the levy stuff for us. And he's gonna be doing most of the speaking tonight and answering your questions. So be nice to get through this part of it and then we can go from there. Yep.
And I'm just gonna turn it over to David Williams from Piper Sandler. So he can go through his presentation and he's more than willing to take questions throughout the presentation. So don't feel like you need to hold discussion back. So.
We always do that.
A shy bunch, I can tell. Yeah. David Williams, Piper Sandler, in case you didn't hear that. David was just looking around for other Davids who do this work. So he found me. We are.
I apologize. And just for the listening public here, because this presentation is most around fact finding around a potential levy. That's just one of multiple options that we have for this. So I don't want the public that's listening to think this is the only thing we're considering. Right? So
It's important to become knowledgeable.
yes.
We at Piper Sandler, we have been long-term partners with the city. We primarily serve in financial consulting capacity around debt issuance. We help you all with many financings you've done over the years, and we're proud to continue to work with you. Through that work, through our work with debt financing and things like geo bonds and all of that, we have gained a bit of an expertise in the property tax system and in understanding how it can work for jurisdictions, cities, counties, school districts, et cetera. In other ways, not just through municipal debt, municipal finance, but something like the local option levy. It's fair to say Oregon's property tax system is unique. And so that uniqueness gives this potential tool for the city. And so what your staff asked us to look into is understanding what potential capacity exists for the city in a local option levy. You all, I'm sure, are aware of this wonderful word called compression. And that is where this understanding of capacity comes into play, is understanding really what role compression plays in the jurisdiction. We will cover that for sure. As David said, please feel free to interrupt with questions as we go. I appreciate it. I saw some earlier and I'm going to try to work those in. If I don't get to something, just stop me when we're on the right slide, or even if we're not, I'm happy to answer. I'm going to do a really quick sort of local option 101 for all of us here. And of course, for anybody watching the live stream, so we understand the sort of basic mechanics of how this exists. And then we'll go through the modeling that we did for the city, which of course is a separate report. Some of that is in here. I know you all received that ahead of time as well. So local option levy, sort of what is it? This is an alternative for raising revenues for jurisdictions via the property tax system. It was created by Measure 5 in 1997 when that measure passed. And we'll talk a little bit about that measure. It's available for operations or capital. However, almost nobody uses it for capital funding because of the way it collects revenue. Geo bond authority is a much more powerful tool for capital infrastructure when it comes to voter approved investments. So almost everybody uses it for 5-year operating levies. These are serial levies that can be renewed, or I should say are required to be up for a vote every 5 years. Capital levy has a limit of 10 years or useful life of the project. Again, hardly anybody uses that. I know that's not relevant to your work here today. It can be levied as a rate per thousand or a fixed dollar amount. Almost everybody that uses it for a levy rate, for the reason that when you levy for a rate, of course, you are able to capture the increasing value in a community. As you know, a community like Sherwood has pretty robust value growth over time. Yes.
Does it have to be against all properties or can you just do levied against certain property types?
That is a great question. I'm not aware that anybody has done some sort of bifurcated local option levy.
We do stuff first all the time.
Fantastic. I would say so I'm not a lawyer and that would definitely be a legal question. I'm not entirely sure that you can bifurcate a local option levy by property type. But I would defer to counsel on that. I would say that knowing assessors, they might have a little heart attack trying to implement it. And for obvious reasons, that question had come up as well about industrial property. And we'll get into that here in a little bit later when we talk about the mix of properties. There may be some data validity problems if you think about trying to segregate it by property type. So you would want to probably explore that more with legal counsel and with the assessor to understand how the mechanics of that type of tool might work. So for the purposes of this, we're talking all property in the jurisdiction, right? Okay, and it is subject to a majority vote of voters at either a May or November election. Those are what you might call the regular elections. You could go to either the March or September special elections. However, the old double majority requirement would apply. We have to get both a 50% yes and a 50% turnout in the election at the March and September dates. Hence, nobody uses those dates. I can't, if you probably have not received a March or September ballot in at least a decade, if not more.
March is not an option. We're past the deadline on that.
Well, certainly from a timeline perspective, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So a little bit of where this exists, we talked about Measure 50. So you have these two things that happened in Oregon in the 90s, Measure 5 and Measure 47/50. Measure 5, of course, created a cap on the amount of taxes that could be collected per property. $15 per 1,000 of real market value per property would be the max. $10 over here for all local governments. $5 over here for all education governments. Education is just those three. All local governments is a much longer list, as you all know, right? So you said, for your purposes, $10 per 1,000 of real market value was the maximum that could be collected. So take that rate, put it on real market value, that created a taxes imposed dollar amount per property. That's your limit.
Right, for those listening, this is complex. So that's
Yes.
real market value,
That's real market.
not
value.
assessed
That's
market
right.
value. So
That's
if
right.
your AMV is half your RMV, then effectively those would be $10, $20 caps.
You'll see some wonderful scenarios later in the presentation too about that. Absolutely. So and that's a great segue to along came Measure 50. And Measure 50 said, okay, that's all well and good. You did that real market value cap. But instead, what we're going to say is we want to tax properties on a new construct called assessed value. Okay. So it took in 1997, it said, let's cap every property at their value it is today, roll it back 10%, and then say it can only grow at 3% a year forever. There's no change at sale. So I don't know, I'm not going to call anybody out if you came from a state south of here. They have reset at sale. So when you sell a property, the real market value becomes the assessed value of that property. In Oregon, you sell a property, it goes up 3% from the year before. That's it. There's no magic number that boosts it back to what its market value is. Hence the comment about a lot of residential properties, particularly here, almost all of them, their assessed value is half of their real market value. So this is the exercise tonight. Everybody should go home, pull their property tax bill and take a look, and you will see that distinction on your property tax bill, that real market value and the assessed value, two different numbers. Well, that creates a gap, right? Because remember, the cap is on the amount of taxes collected based on real market value, but we didn't change any rates because, oh, by the way, Measure 50 locked in permanent rates. So the city has a permanent rate, $3.09, something like that.
3.295.
There you go. That's the permanent rate collection. You cannot change that. That is fixed in time. It was fixed in time in 1997. Right?
Some cities who have a zero.
There are some cities and other jurisdictions that are very, very tiny. A lot of it due to quirks that happened in 1997. For instance, you may have had a 25-cent sort of operating levy, but maybe they had a $4 or $5 serial levy at the time that happened to expire in 1997 when Measure 50 passed. So that serial levy disappeared and they were left with a 25-cent permanent rate.
Tiger.
Tiger. a lot of Southern Oregon jurisdictions, a lot, Grants Pass area, Josephine County, that kind of thing. Okay, so remember, we've got caps on real market value math, but now our tax rates are applied to assessed value. So as real market value continued to go up over time, remember, we're now like 50%. Your permanent rate, however, is being applied to an assessed value that is half of the real market value. So you have this, let's call it a theoretical collection amount. Let's take the $10, or let's just keep it in perspective of your $3 and apply that to a real market value property. That is sort of the theoretical, what you could have been collecting had it been floated at real market value, but you're actually collecting only on assessed value. And therefore you create this gap between those two numbers. As we talk about as the gap. Therein lies the local option levy. The authority was granted. You could go in and you could seek voter approval to levy inside that gap. That gap, however, is not always precisely defined, and therein is the problem. This is a statewide chart, just describes the difference here. So you notice before 1997, we have a unified orange line in this chart. That is property values steadily increasing or slowly increasing, however you want to look at it. Over time, you hit to 1997, you roll back 10%, you see the orange line go down, and then we have an almost nearly fixed 3% growth forever. Now, the reason it might not look exactly like 3% is because people build new homes, right? We add value to the rolls. Not in here. If you build a new home in Sherwood, they build a new piece of property, the home is $500,000. It does not enter the property tax rolls at $500,000. It enters the property tax roll at something called the change property ratio. And that is basically the average of all similarly situated properties. So all residential properties in the jurisdiction are at 53% of real market value. So that brand new home built today will be assessed from day one at 53% of its real market value and then grow at 3% a year forever, right? So it will begin day one with a gap already, right? So that's another quirk in our property tax system. So that's why you get a little bit of line, because we are actually adding value, but we're not adding real market value, we're adding new assessed value. And then the dashed line, of course, is what has happened to real market value over the years. You do see an interesting little downward spike there following the 2008 housing crisis. Statewide, those lines did not converge. There are areas in the state, Deschutes County, where that dashed line would go below that orange line.
Do you have this for Sherwood? Because I think that'd be more relevant. For
I don't have it broken down just for Sherwood. Yeah, I'll see if I can dig it up, but I don't have it just for Sherwood. Now, what happens if that line goes down? And a bit of why the law of averages is interesting to look at for context, but it's not necessarily specific to your ability to collect, is because the way this all works is really a property by property basis. That's why the analysis has to be done. You can't just say, oh, it's 53%, so we got this gap, and we'll just do some rough math on that. That napkin math is good, but it's not precise for these purposes when you're thinking about, hey, we need to know how much we would be budgeting for this. We need to know what we would be collecting in year one, right? So a quirk happens if that dashed line goes below the orange line, it suppresses market value. So your assessed value, your market value can never be higher than your assessed value. So it would actually push that line back down, kind of like a ratchet, and back up. That happened in other places in the state. I point out Deschutes County, some coastal counties, and that is by and large where you had significant second home ownership in those areas. Everybody was uniformly hit by the housing crisis. Second home values were acutely hit by that housing crisis.
Even in the metro area where, like, because of the vacancies in certain types of commercial property types,
Sure.
it just takes one or two to really significantly impact your.
Sure. Like right now, there's a building that just sold in downtown Portland for like 10% of the previous sale of that building. So the Big Pink. So I can almost guarantee you that every property owner in downtown Portland is appealing their assessment right now to
Oh,
see
yeah,
if they
that
can
cost the city of
lower
Portland
that.
tens of
Yeah.
millions of dollars.
City of Portland, Portland School District, Multnomah County, all significant. Okay, so this gap grows. This is again, it's just conceptual, just so we understand the mechanics. Gap grows, you have it there. So let's use a couple of examples just to paint what that gap looks like, because it's going to be different for classes of property for a variety of reasons. So On our left, we have just a straight residential property, and on our right, a commercial property. I'm sure you can tell by now that's not an actual commercial property in Sherwood. There's nothing called big box. Neither is that house. That's a stock photo. So let's say you have a house that has a $500,000 assessed value, a real market value. Right now, in city of Sherwood, your average for all residential properties is 53% of real market value. So it would be an assessed value of $265,000. Okay. We'll get to taxes on this in a minute. Commercial property, however, often operates differently. So this commercial property over here, this actually is a piece of commercial property in the city of Sherwood, has a $27.5 million real market value, right? Its assessed value, however, is $26.1 million, a 94.8% ratio. So you don't have as big a gap over here on that piece of commercial property. That's really interesting for a variety of reasons. Commercial property, we talk about, is more sensitive to the business cycle ebb and flow of value. So you do get a lot more appeals and reappraisals. You also have the ability to depreciate certain assets as a part of that lower the value of the property. So for a variety of reasons, they stay very much closer to 100% generally. This is where it begins to get interesting for you all. We'll get to that. Just some summaries of this, nothing particularly of note here, the interesting bullet points. So let's talk about City of Sherwood, okay? So the first thing we want to do is we want to look macro. We want to look at all of the properties in total and just kind of see what the mix looks like, right? Caveat, of course, all of this data is from the county assessor. It is, sort of a straight pull from them that we then do all of the math calculations and the analysis based on it, okay? So we look at this and there's things that draw my eye as we look at this that are important to know before we do the next level. So first of all, we see this overall, your total assessed value to your real market value, the bottom line, 54%. So remember we said residential is 53, your overall is 54%. So there are big gaps here in the city. So we go to the top, of course, your largest property tax paying clients, your largest property value holders are your residential property holders. That's 68% of the value in the city. So not units, but value. And it is 53% AV to RMV, right? Okay, commercial's number two, $1 billion in Measure 5 real market value, $500 million in assessed value. This was the first very interesting finding, not really finding, but as we dug through, very interesting note. So remember that big box store I showed you was at 94.8%. But right here, I'm seeing that your commercial property has an assessed value, 54% of its real market value. That is kind of an anomaly. We don't see that in every jurisdiction around the state when we do these. Okay, so that's a notable piece. So you have 88% of all of the value in the jurisdiction is averaging, let's call it 53.5%, 54% real market value.
Is there a reason why that anomaly is happening in Sherwood?
It most likely, I didn't dig through like property value history of it. Would take looking at some individual properties over time. My suspicion is thinking about what was happening in 1997 and the properties that were developed as commercial property then or shortly thereafter, and the explosion that happened in the community that then rapidly escalated the value of those properties. So a lot of the stuff at the 12 Sherwood Road intersection, right?
It's all dirt.
Right. And then as those were built, you think about the first big main commercial development there at the intersection of 99 and 12 Sherwood, right? That coincided with the explosive growth in Sherwood, right? Well, explosive growth, obviously the people moving in, houses being built, all that's fantastic. That just skyrockets the value of that commercial property, right? And so it's all, when any of these, even with residential properties, it's all about what was happening in 97 and the path it took to today, right? I could like shorthand it, not necessarily for Sherwood, but for sort of globally, you think about residential property, a great way to think about commercial property does get wonkier because of the way it works, but you think about residential property. So a piece of property set new construction aside, a piece of property that was generally a well-off piece of property in 97 and is still generally a well-off piece of property today will have a smaller gap. Piece of property that was a impoverished or destitute piece of property in 97 been improved and is now a wealthy piece of property is going to have a huge gap.
Okay.
Right? The examples are obvious, like think North Williams or North Mississippi and Portland, right? You have properties that their assessed value there is like 7% of their real market value, right? Because of what that property was in 97 versus what that property is today.
Okay.
Okay, so 88% is 53.5. That tells me we're probably not gonna have a huge concern with compression, okay? It's not zero, but probably not a huge concern. So let me look at some of these others, multifamily housing, huge gap there, but it's not a whole ton of value. The rest of these start to fall off in the amount of value, so their impact will be marginal on collections, right? I know a question came up about industrial property, and as I drive in here today, you pass like the Lamb Research Building and you come in Oregon Road there and all of that new sort of light industrial. I would note that all of that, according to the county, is commercial property, is not industrial property. So all of that is interesting. It's not relevant for the final math because the final math is property by property, irrespective of how it is zoned or classified by you or by the county, right? It has a real market value and an assessed value at that property. And that is where the math lies, right? The other thing we need to look at is what are the overall tax rates on property. Now, remember way back at the beginning of this, we said your cap is $10 per thousand of real market value. So if you had no gap at all, if every piece of property was 100% of its real market value, I look at your total consolidated, your highest. So essentially all of the tax rates in the city, of all the various puzzle of overlapping taxing jurisdictions. So, the county, you guys, the city, 12 Valley Fire and Rescue, there's this urban road, you've got Metro, you've got all of these. Ignore the education side, just the local government side. Your highest level of consolidation is a grouping of tax codes that has this $9.50 collection rate right now. And that is by rounding 100% of the city. That the others are not true zeros, they're just like multiple decimal places out. There's just not a lot of people, and you can see that in the value numbers there, okay? So 100%. So already I know, guess what you don't have? You don't have compression in your permanent rate collection. Because by definition, everybody will be below $10, even if they were at real market value, because your total collections are only $9.50, not yours, but all of the tax rates combined. So, job number one. So in theory, you could do a 49 and 30 cent levy rate, 49 cent and change levy rate. And you would not have to think about compression at all. Nothing would be compressed. You would collect dollar for dollar what is levied. Okay? But if you're considering something higher, that's where the analysis comes into. How much would get carved out for compression? So let's talk about compression really quickly. And then I'll show you that. We got some examples for it in here too. So compression says if the number, that 950.67, is higher than $10, if the number's above it and the amount collected, so let's say it's $12, you apply that $12, you can have a levy rates higher than, you can have rates more than $12.
I gotta just guess, is
Yep.
this where I might have to pay, but my neighbor might not have their?
That's absolutely correct. Yes, yes. So if like, say it was $12 and your piece of property was worth the same as its real market value, you would pay $10. You wouldn't pay the extra $2. But if your neighbor's property was 53% of real market value, well, they're probably going to pay the full $12. They'll pay the whole thing. If you were, say, 95% of real market value, you'll pay maybe $10.50, right? And you won't pay the other $1.50. So it will get compressed. There is a note in here that I think did lead to some confusion, and I do want to clarify it. So we are aware all local option levies that overlap would be compressed on a pro rata share by the county. So you would have, if you pass a local option levy, we know the county has two that are consolidated into one rate for these purposes, a local option levy. 12 Valley Fire Rescue has a local option levy. Metro has a local option levy. All of those levies would be compressed on a pro rata basis, right? So if yours is $1 and the county's is $2, they're gonna take 2/3 of the cut and you're gonna take 1/3 of the cut. That's how the sort of pro rata share happens. For the purposes of this, our model doesn't allow us to do that pro rata compression. So it might slightly overstate the compression to your potential local option levy. For what you'll see, that is a nominal amount and only really exists at higher levy rates than probably what you're considering, right? So for that purpose. So I just want to clarify that. Okay, so we run all this, we put all the properties in, and we create this big spreadsheet, and we look at every individual property in the city, and we do the math. Where is it gonna be compressed? What is, how much would it collect? And so we array this, there's no, we just start from zero and we array every levy rate on up to, this table goes out to $5 as well. That's us. We make no bones and no guesses about what people might be considering. So we also then say, okay, let's project, let's get some tolerance of like, if you have low growth or negative growth, or if you have a high growth year, or just the baseline. And in the report, you'll note where we describe what those assumptions are. They're, let's call them a standard deviation away from the norm on either end. But what this tells us is there's not a lot of variance. And there's not a lot of variance because the gap is so big on 88% of your property that you don't have compression variance at high growth level or low growth level. That's why these bars are so close together at each individual levy rate projection. So you can see the numbers of what we would project, 50 cents at 1.4 million in the middle, or on up to 560 at 5.60 at $2 a thousand. So just to give you a sense of that spread and how that works. The compression would come into play really in a significant way at out about the $5 event horizon. So there is some loss to compression in here. And let me show you that. I'll breeze through some of these. I think we're doing pretty good on time here. Okay, so let's show some examples of where mostly compression doesn't exist. This is why most of the examples will show you no compression. And then we'll get to one that does show compression, which, not to steal my own thunder, it was the one earlier that we saw. Okay, so residential house, 500,000. Let's say it's 53% of its assessed, of its real market value, 265. How does this math work? So currently, that house would be paying $2,519.28 on all of the current existing tax rates. You would add a 75-cent levy or a dollar levy. We modeled both of those. The math works out again even further. We say that's $198 or $265, depending on the levy rate, for a new total. So this is how conceptually to think about how to do this as well with the measure 5. So new total, 2,700, 2,784. Well, we also need to figure out what's the theoretical limit for this house. Well, the theoretical limit is that $10 per thousand, which on $500,000 real market is $5,000. So this house is well below that limit. So there is zero compression. You could add on this house, like a $7 or $8 levy rate and still not get to compression because you're still not going to hit $5,000, right? So at any of these rates, there's no compression on this piece of residential property, likely none on almost any residential property in the city. There's another one, just giving house value examples so you understand scale a little bit. There's a $700,000 house. It would have an assessed value of $371. You can see 278, 371 on the levy rates. Still there, a measure 5 limit goes up to 7,000, still well below that. One more at 950K, just because I didn't want to put a clean million on that sheet. 503 for an assessed value, and you can see it goes up to 9,500 for their theoretical limit. Still well below that, no compression on these pieces of property. Okay. Let's talk about commercial, because that is where it gets interesting and where we often see it. So you remember my commercial example above, that's this one here. It is at 94.8%. All the commercial properties in here are actual properties in the city. I went on the assessor's website to find them, and so all of their ratios are exactly for that piece of property. They will vary much more widely than residential property. So this piece of property here has a current tax bill of $248,000 and change. if you added $1 local option levy, that'd be a $26,000 increase in their property taxes for a new total of $267,000. Well, their Measure 5 capacity limit is $275,000. So even at 94%, even at 95% of real market value, again, because your rate collections are below $10 now, you still had significant capacity. So even though adding $1 takes us up to $10.50, we're still uncompressed on this piece of property. You see their theoretical max is $275,581, right? We're getting close to it there, but we're still under it. Well, what happens if we did a $1.50 levy instead? Then we hit compression, right? So we add a $1.50 levy, we take that new total up to 287 and change. And remember, their Measure 5 capacity didn't change with your local option levy. It's still 275 and change. Therefore, that piece of property would pay $12,000 less of that local option levy. It would compress. Maybe a little bit less because the other levies would get compressed as well. Again, we talked about that slight hiccup in our modeling. But for illustrative purposes, this gets the case across.
So I want to make
yes.
sure there's time for questions.
Yes.
And discussion, because this council likes to discuss stuff, so just heads up, and I think unless there's objection, I think most of us get this.
Yep.
So.
Yep. So the key here is, of course, this, and to your point of the neighbors paying different rates, this piece of property would have an effective levy rate of $1.04 instead of $1.50. That's their threshold before compression hits. But this is 94.8%. Right? So the other examples in here, shocking, none of them show compression. And you'll notice what I did in this, I ran these at $2 instead of $1 or $1.50 or even 75 cents, because I want to see where the threshold is. Again, not projecting where you all think you would go with any potential levy. I just want to know where that threshold is. So at $2, this guy is still 15,000 below. Again, actual piece of property in the jurisdiction. This piece of property here, 60% of real market value, well below actual piece of property. This piece of property, small commercial, get a little smaller in scale, a $1 million assessed value, 2.5 million real market value, well below, right? This is actual hotel, well below. So no compression in any of those, very few at that 95 and above where you would begin to have sensitivity, which is why we go all the way back to this table, which is why this goes up at an almost even linear scale as you go up in levy rate, because we're not normally, if I run this out, if I ran this rate out to say $10, you would see an inflection point where it would begin to level off, where any increase gets you no additional dollars. Now, you may have heard maybe compression is a big deal because it is, and it may have been a concern because if you all were watching when Sherwood School District was going through its local option levy conversation, their local option levy, after they imposed it and began collecting, they collected $500,000 less than they projected. We didn't do an analysis like this for them. They collected $500,000 less than they projected because of compression. But the school district consolidated permanent rates for all the jurisdictions, school district, ESD, and community college, is over $5 already to begin with. It's like $5.50.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why day one, there are buildings compressed, right? You don't have that dynamic. So that's where you end up the bottom line. These numbers, absolutely any questions y'all have, happy to answer them.
So is that low, middle, high growth?
Yeah, so in the full report, if you go to page 7, it kind of looks like this. Apologies to any online audience, but in the full report, which was in whatever packet distribution you have, it's not in the PowerPoint. It's in the full report. We talk about it. So essentially, low growth scenario is we model a negative 3% real market value on residential, negative 4% on commercial, flat on all everybody else. All everybody else is not super meaningful because it's such a small amount.
The way we talk about it is on top of 3%. So we know, so when you say low growth, are you saying?
So let me keep clarifying. So we model, because growth is driven by external value, by market value, not by assessed value. So we model negative real market value growth. So we're modeling like a housing crisis again. And what we do is we test the sensitivity of what would that do to assessed value. Because again, it's using our house as an example, or almost every piece of property we showed, except for the 94.8%. If that property declined in value, it's not going to decline in assessed value. It would take 20-30% decline in actual value before it would hit assessed value, right? So you're not closing the gap in any measurable way. That's
I think the question is, what are your metrics for low, medium and high?
I don't know that it matters. The numbers are barely different.
essentially what happens in every scenario is your baseline existing properties grow by 3% a year. In low, medium and high, every existing property will grow by 3% in assessed value.
So you're just saying
Baseline.
that we're not gonna,
Baseline.
AMV is not gonna get close enough to RMB, is all you're saying.
No, definitely not at all. What we do in the one distinction in each of those, so we say there's no collapse in the existing property. In the low growth, we say you will have no new commercial properties added to the rolls and you will only have 30 residential properties. In the baseline growth, we say 70 and flat. In the high growth, we say 100 and flat for commercial. So these are relatively conservative scenarios to begin with.
Just to be clear for the public, no one is proposing $1.50 to $5 per thousand property taxes. Exactly.
This is an intellectual exercise that we did for you all. So yeah, thank you for clarifying.
So I think it was super helpful, and if our community's watching this, a lot of times there's a lot of fusion around that property, so.
I mean, not to editorialize, and it's not about your decision making, but for every jurisdiction that we've helped that has pursued a local option levy, probably the most important task of any campaign is helping people understand this distinction between assessed value and real market value and how to quantify that for themselves as a taxpayer, right? Because by and large, most everybody, if they see a buck, you propose $1 and they're gonna be, well, my house is worth $6.50, so I'll just do what's $1 times that divided by 1,000. That's my rate. Well, no, it's not. Your house is probably worth 250 or 300,000 or whatever, right? So helping people to understand that. I know Sherwood School District they had a big website built where you could go look up your property value and or you could say my property is worth this much and would do some math for you. So that's often the biggest task in that work.
Right. The only caveat to that is, yes, my house is worth, I don't know, 650,000. I don't have that money, and whereas that percentage is coming out of my pay, out of my monthly operating budget, right? And so, yeah, on paper it's worth that, but it doesn't matter to me because it's still more money coming out of my pocket, right? Like I get it.
It's not as much as you think, because it's.
Oh, 100%, but it's still, yeah, but in that example, yeah, it's still an extra, $300 I gotta come up with every year or whatever, and and especially when you say, you said, well, let's ignore this tax and this tax and this tax, and then, let's avoid, we'll only add it in with the Tualatin Valley Fire and the, Metro and, and at a certain point, your audience glazes over where you go.
Well, I think that's what this discussion
Yeah.
is gonna take us to, right? I mean, between this and then when we look at the fee potential, that's what we have to decide.
No, I get it, yeah, but that's why, even though I appreciate the knowledge here, I also go, yeah, but it doesn't make me feel good, I'm only being taxed on my assessed value, you know what I mean? Like I feel better than if I'm being taxed on my
Right.
actual value, but.
That's what we're gonna have to talk about is
Yeah.
the appetite for community to.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Yet, cause everybody else beat us.
So.
The library, the Washington County.
So, should we enter the discussion phase at this
Yeah.
point? To quote Doug down here. And just to preface this, I want to learn a lot more about potential fees. And I have some thoughts on that you won't be able to answer tonight, but to go back for a follow-on conversation, but I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I'd just be curious what we believe we need to plug whatever gap we're anticipating, coming over a 5-year period. Do we need 1.4 million? Do we need 5 million? Do we need somewhere in between?
Because what we
And
need,
then what would that look like for maintaining existing services or additive. right?
What's our goal? What are we trying? We're
Yeah.
trying to just maintain, or are we trying to maintain and
Take it up a level.
take it up to, we know as we grow, we need, more officers or more, and it's a public safety levy, so what else all that?
I wanna
I
get
know
into that
you
too.
wanna label it something else, yeah.
The general operations side.
I was saying, but if, unless we return after city council meeting, we can add this to the Saturday conversations too. Goal setting, but yeah, and then there's with the two scenarios. For our charter, we can put something for an up and down on this May, this November, or next November. And that's that is the choices. And in the scheme of things, I'm not supporting anything for November of this year. But the point that Doug made is, yeah, what is the, I agree, and I think most people agree, would agree that inflation that has occurred in the last 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, damaged local government's ability to normally follow their long-term plan. Because when it's at 2 or 3%, we can turn around and create some efficiencies and get some growth and get to meet our big plan and be responsible like we have for many, many years. But when you have inflation at the rates that we did, it blows it up in a big way. And we need to seriously consider the means to adapt to the new reality.
It's a
Go,
huge.
go.
I just clarifying, it's for the people listening, it's a structural problem with our system.
Yeah.
Because when inflation for cities is running 5, 6, 7% a year, most of it out of our control, like PERS increases and stuff like that, and we're capped at 3% growth. Those are two lines that someday are gonna intersect.
They did.
Well, they have, and then we cut, they have, and then we cut, and it's, at some point, that's not sustainable, but.
And per your comment and Doug's comment, everyone else says, the kind of the tools that are before us, if it's a local option levy conversation, okay, it's a 5-year levy. What is you pass a couple different ways of a flat amount you're gonna collect per year, or it's a rate that we would collect per year. What is you would pass it once and it's set at that. So you collect more on year one than you need in theory, then, because you're kind of would be targeting to try to figure it out.
You get to 3% growth every.
So it's not simple.
But I see the point. Can I go back to my question? What's the amount we need?
Yeah, the amount we need is, after discussions with the chief and Craig is, initially I had about $2.5 million at least. But no, a year per year. But then Keith's point is we gotta look at this continual growth of expenses over revenues. And I wanna analyze that a little bit more because the initial starting point for me is about $2.5 million.
Cool. And I would like to know what your thoughts are and what that more than just your thoughts,
Yeah.
so like a presentation on what that $2.5 million gets us. Is that just keeping status quo, or is that adding services, especially if, again, other options besides levies, if we're gonna sell this to the public, we got a lot of work to do in understanding what that is. And to Doug's point, 2.5 will not cover the entire operations of the PD, so because of the fungible nature of our general fund, it really is a general fund levy, unless we can come up with some scheme to protect it, with the future council doing budgets and stuff like that, so.
Well, so, yeah, but to Doug's point of just how much is the potential, that if you're the status quo, whatever here, so if it's 2.5 year one, year 5, the total might be 3 3 million.
Mhm.
And so now you know what's the cumulative of that divided by 5, and then that's your
What you need.
average. What you need to be.
You have to plan for the increases for the year.
But you do get some built-in increase.
Yeah.
So the way I look at it is I look at it as three scenarios. You have if we don't pass anything, what does the next 5 years look like? What are we cutting over the next 5 years? Not just public safety, but across the general fund services. Scenario 2 is, to me, baseline, just to not have any cuts at all and keep existing service levels.
Yeah, so
What does that cost?
Okay.
And then scenario 3 being, if we were to go where we wanted to actually add people or add services, what does that cost? And what would those be?
Is that to get us back to pre-cuts, or are you talking pre-cuts and additional?
To me, I consider what we have right now to be status quo.
Okay.
But that's my voice. You guys may look at it differently.
I think to keep it simple, that's gotta be baseline, right? Just where we're at now.
So there may be, so the status quo, or which. What keeps us at that, yeah, I like your three scenarios.
What do we need just to not have to cut anymore? What happens if we don't pass anything? What are we cutting across the general fund?
And then what do we
And
need?
then the third scenario is, hey, if we actually want to get back some of these services we lost, and maybe even add some additional services, what would those be across the general fund? And if it's only in public safety, that's fine, say it, but if it's elsewhere too, that's fine too.
Could be
And what would that cost?
public work, well, yeah.
That's why I look at it. You guys can
I agree.
have a different idea.
You gotta have a baseline to compare against. Yeah.
And then for David sent out earlier today, or Craig sent it out, the information on the fee.
Yeah.
Fees, so we can have another discussion
I
on it.
think we're gonna have to have a conversation around that, because one of the things I wanted out on fees for future conversation, because I did some digging around. Grants Pass has a commercial only fee, and it's prorated based on square footage. So in their highest category for us would be like a Target or something, it's a couple $1,000s a month, all the way down. You know, for a small shop, it's like $30 a month, right? So I think we need to go out and look at what other cities are doing there on the commercial side. I don't have data to back this up, but based on ride-alongs, we spend a lot of time at our large box retailers.
Sure.
Yeah, so in the end, what Grants Pass did is actually went out and did a study to show that. And that was how they structured a fee. Nice thing about a commercial fee is that doesn't have to go to the voters. Some people might not think that's a good thing, but it's just an easier path for us as long as we have support for it. If we do a utility fee for residential, that would have to go to the voters under our charter, and of course, the levy would have to go to the voters. But I think I would like to see a lot more data on the fee side as well.
I would on the commercial fee side. I will not vote for it until it will be had in any certain things. But I'm one vote.
I'm at this point, it's just collecting data and understanding
I'm
options.
open to
Yeah.
hearing.
I am interested in what is the difference in your mind between a residential fee and a residential levy?
Accountability. A levy has to be renewed every 5 years.
Okay.
It also has a built-in increase, the 3% increase a year, instead of us having to vote for an increase every year. And then the third thing is it's not regressive, right? So the more your house is worth, the more you pay versus a fee. The way I've heard it described so far is the same fee for.
Unless theoretically we said right
Retired
square
persons.
foot, right? If we
I
said.
don't even know if the assessor can do that or there are billing software, what they're capable of or not. We'd have to look again. We'd have to. I mean, if we could figure out a way for it not to be regressive, I might be open to it, but if it's just that every resident pays the same amount, I'm not in favor of that.
Yeah, and the fee could be increased up to 2% every year without a vote.
Yeah, or we get the 3%
Commercial
built in automatically. Well, the 2% we would still, the council would still have to vote on every year.
Yeah, on the fee
Yeah,
schedule,
Where
yeah.
but mostly it's the 5 year, it's the regressiveness. And the 5 year, like I like the 5 year, it's like a check-in, like if the city's. Managing this money well, spending it wisely, doing things right, great, we're gonna give you a renewal. But if people feel like. Some future council is abusing, none of us are on, is abusing the money, then it might not get renewed some year, or if some sort of economic. disaster befalls the community, then they can vote it down and. So, but it seems like if it was a fee and we're in total control over it, then a disaster happens or downturn or something, and we say, hey, we gotta make cuts regardless, and we're gonna wipe this fee out because, you know what I mean? Like that does feel like we have more levers than we gotta wait 5 years till it comes up again. And so I'm a little, anyway, but I like the idea of the bigger discussion on it because.
This is great information.
As we put these numbers together, 3 items. Is there any interest in us putting numbers together on what you guys just went through, for the traffic light stuff, for public safety, for the school zones? Do you want to see those numbers included into that, or would you rather that be straight up?
Well, it depends on what's in the baseline or do nothing baseline and.
That's also capital.
But you could potentially do that. You could fund one-time stuff.
If you want to public, if you want to do a capital use, if you wanted to, part of a conversation that you collect more than you need on year one. Because
Operating funds to cover capital expenses.
and
General fund could.
Yeah, no, I know you can do that, yeah. I can consider that.
I just, we can include it all separated out, so you guys.
Yeah.
can see.
I mean, I guess that maybe you give us a menu, right, like, this would cost 2 cents per thousand, this item would cost 3, and then we can just pick from the menu, right, and say, okay. There might be 27 items.
I see David's look over there, he's
I
like.
just want to make,
That's what I would do.
if you have something that you're interested in looking
That
at,
David.
we actually bring that back to you.
Yeah.
So, if not,
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you have a dollar amount.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy calculation to know, to turn it into,
Yeah,
yeah, cause you could calculate the total is gonna be $1.37 per thousand. Well, that total is made up of 27 different line items, so each one of those can be easily calculated into a per thousand number. So,
I just want to make sure if we put it in there, it's what you want to see.
Awesome. All right, David, you got what you need?
I got what I need.
I'll send you a list of the cities I found that are doing that, square foot one. There's one that's doing it based on trips, which I think would be really difficult. But there's some creative stuff out there.
do we wanna add this to Saturday
Okay.
or another work session? Do you wanna add it to goal setting session or another work session at a later date?
Let's do another work session.
To talk about.
That'll give us a little more time.
Time to-
Yeah, what you said this today and then add.
We are gonna need some time.
That for officer, that kind of stuff, but I think it gives us a little more time to move it out to the next work session.
Yeah.
So,
Even like,
awesome.
No, no, because we gotta do polling. You have to do polling.
Yeah.
And November might be tough.
First West, I mean, you gotta do polling.
It could be.
Yeah. All right,
Unless we do.
10 minutes later.
All right, so we'll get 5 minutes. We'll start over there, give everybody a chance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beaver to my group of folks, your questions.